A desperate discovery. Sergeant Ethan Voss moved carefully through the wreckage, his boots crunching over broken metal and burnt debris. The air was thick with smoke, and the scent of war still lingered. Blood, fire, and something worse. The battle had ended days ago, but the scars remained. He was here on a simple mission: search for any wounded soldiers left behind. Humans or enemies, it didn't matter. His orders were clear: rescue humans, leave the Xalcor to die. His rifle was ready, his nerves sharp. The Xalcor Dominion, the alien empire at war with Earth, had been ruthless in battle. Their soldiers, tall and powerful, saw humans as weaker beings, unworthy of mercy. Ethan had seen their cruelty firsthand. Prisoners left to starve, entire colonies wiped out. So why was he here, stepping into the ruins of an alien outpost? Then he heard it. A weak, ragged breath, barely audible. He froze, listening. His instincts told him to move on. Ignore it, leave, but something inside him wouldn't let him. Slowly, he turned towards the sound. The collapsed remains of a Xalcor bunker stood before him, its walls shattered, its entrance blocked by fallen metal beams. The breath came again, followed by a soft, pained whimper. Someone was trapped inside. Someone still alive. Ethan gritted his teeth. It was probably a Xalcor soldier, wounded and left behind. He should just radio it in, mark the location, and keep going. That was the smart choice. That was the safe choice. But instead, he slung his rifle over his shoulder and started pulling at the rubble. Piece by piece, he worked, sweat forming on his brow despite the cold air. The war had hardened him, made him cautious, but it hadn't killed his humanity. Maybe that was a weakness. Maybe not. After what felt like forever, he finally cleared enough debris to see inside. And there she was, a Xalcor woman, barely conscious, her violet skin pale and sickly, her long silver hair matted with dirt and dried blood. She looked thin, starving, as if she had been there for days without food or water. Her golden eyes, once bright, were dull and hollow, but as they flickered open, they locked onto him. For a moment, neither of them moved. Ethan's hand instinctively went to his sidearm. If she attacked, he'd have to end it fast. But she didn't move. She didn't even try. Instead, her lips parted, and in a voice so weak it was almost a whisper, she spoke. Human. Ethan stiffened. The Xalcor rarely spoke human languages unless they were interrogating prisoners or making threats. But this wasn't a threat. This wasn't an interrogation. This was a plea. She was too weak to fight, too exhausted to do anything, but look at him with those desperate, starving eyes. Ethan knew he had a decision to make. If he followed his orders, he would leave her here. She was the enemy. The war had no room for kindness. If he saved her, it could mean trouble for him. His commanders would see it as treason. But she was dying, and something deep inside Ethan, something stronger than fear, wouldn't let him walk away. Slowly, he reached into his pack and pulled out a small ration bar. Basic military food. Nothing special, but enough to keep someone alive. He held it out. For a second, the Xalcor woman just stared at it, as if she couldn't believe what was happening. Then, with a trembling hand, she reached out, hesitated, and took it. She tore into it with weak, unsteady fingers, devouring it as if she hadn't eaten in days. Maybe she hadn't. Ethan watched in silence, knowing that this moment, this choice, had changed something. She wasn't just some enemy now. She was a life he had saved, a life that, just minutes ago, had been left for dead. And now, for better or worse, he was part of her story. A risky decision. Ethan sat back on his heels, watching the Xalcor woman devour the ration bar with trembling hands. She barely chewed, swallowing each bite as if afraid it might be taken away. It was strange, seeing an alien so desperate, so fragile. The Xalcor were supposed to be warriors, merciless and proud. Yet here she was, starving, weak, and clinging to life. She coughed suddenly, choking on a piece of food. Instinct kicked in, and Ethan reached for his canteen, unscrewing the cap before pausing. Should he really waste water on her? He shook the thought away and held it out. Her golden eyes flickered up to meet his hesitant. For a moment, she didn't move. Was she afraid it was poisoned? Ethan gave a short sigh and took a sip himself before handing it back. She hesitated no longer, grabbing it with shaking fingers and drinking greedily. "Slow down," Ethan muttered. "You'll make yourself sick." She didn't understand the words, but she seemed to grasp the meaning. She pulled the canteen away, breathing heavily, relief evident on her face. Ethan studied her in the dim light of the ruined bunker. What was she doing here? Why had her own people abandoned her? The Xal Corps were known for their discipline. Leaving a wounded soldier behind was not their way. It made no sense. Her voice broke the silence, weak and raspy. "Why?" Ethan blinked. She spoke English. The Xal Corps rarely bothered to learn human languages unless it was for interrogations or diplomacy. Yet she had asked him a question, a simple, powerful one. "Why what?" he asked cautiously. She shifted slightly, still too weak to sit up on her own. Her gaze burned into him, filled with something he couldn't quite name. "Why?" "Help." Ethan didn't answer right away. Maybe he didn't have an answer. He had seen death more times than he cared to count, had walked past fallen enemies without a second thought. Yet something about leaving her to die alone in the dark felt wrong. "Because you're still alive," he finally said, keeping his voice even. "And I don't leave people behind." The alien woman gave a soft, humorless laugh, bitter, tired, knowing. "I am, not people." Ethan frowned. He didn't argue. In the eyes of his superiors, she wasn't. She was the enemy. A thing to be eliminated. He should have left her. Maybe he still should. Instead, he reached into his medkit. She flinched when he moved closer, her muscles tensing despite her weakness. Fear. He had seen it before, on wounded soldiers, men who knew they were at the mercy of someone who could choose to kill them with a single pull of a trigger. "I'm not going to hurt you," he muttered, carefully pulling out a small scanner. "Just checking your vitals." She didn't respond, but she didn't stop him either. The scanner hummed softly as he ran it over her. Low oxygen levels, malnourishment, internal bleeding. She was in bad shape. If he left her here, she wouldn't last another day. The weight of the situation pressed down on him. His radio crackled suddenly, making him tense. A voice came through the static. His unit, checking in. "Voss, report. You found anything?" His mind raced. If he told them, if he reported her, they'd come for her. And they wouldn't bring medics. His jaw tightened. His fingers hovered over the radio switch. He took a slow breath, then pressed down. Negative. No survivors. The words left his mouth before he could think too much about them. Silence. Then, "Copy that. Keep moving." The radio clicked off. The decision was made. He felt her eyes on him. Sharp despite her weakness, she understood. Maybe not the words, but the meaning. He had lied for her. He had chosen to hide her instead of turning her in. "Rest," he said, packing up his med kit. "You'll need your strength." She didn't reply. But for the first time, she didn't look at him with fear. She looked at him with curiosity. And maybe, just maybe, a little bit of hope. The chase begins. The night air was thin, crisp, and deadly silent. Ethan crouched near the shattered wall of the ruined bunker, scanning the horizon with narrowed eyes. The Xal Corps woman, Cirilla, as she had weakly murmured her name, lay just behind him, still too weak to move on her own. He hadn't asked for her name. He wasn't sure why she had given it. Maybe she wanted him to see her as something more than an enemy. Maybe she wanted to remind herself she was still a person. Ethan wasn't sure what that meant for him yet. The radio at his hip crackled. His unit was still patrolling nearby. Too close. He needed to get her out of here before someone doubled back and actually checked the bunker. Then he heard it, the crunch of boots on debris. Not far. 3, maybe 4 men. Moving carefully, methodically. They weren't just passing through. They were searching. Ethan's pulse quickened. Had someone picked up his lie? Had command sent a team to verify? He turned back to Cirella, pressing a finger to his lips. Stay quiet. She didn't need to be told twice. The voices grew clearer as the soldiers advanced. Human voices. Ethan knew them. Sergeant Hayes, Corporal Dren, and a couple of rookies. They were good men. If they found Cirella, they wouldn't hesitate to shoot her where she lay. Ethan tightened his grip on his rifle. His rifle. The same one he had used 100 times before to take down Sal Corps warriors. The same one his own comrades trusted him to fire at the enemy. He had never thought twice about it. Until now. Command says this area is supposed to be clear, Hayes muttered, sweeping a flashlight over the rubble. Voss must have missed something. I dunno, Sarge, Dren replied. If he says it's empty, I believe him. He was acting weird, though. Rushed, another voice added. Maybe he found something and didn't want to share. Ethan clenched his jaw. That was too close to the truth. He had seconds, maybe less, to make a move. Cirella stirred beside him, her breathing shallow but steady. She wasn't in any condition to fight or run. If they found her, she'd be dead before she could lift a finger. Ethan made his choice. He grabbed a piece of shattered metal and tossed it across the ruins. It clattered loudly, bouncing off broken stone. The soldiers tensed, their flashlights whipping toward the sound. What the hell was that? Over there, by the supply crates. Could be a straggler. Move in. That was his cue. Ethan lifted Cirella into his arms, wincing as she sucked in a sharp breath of pain. He moved quickly but carefully, each step deliberate, each breath controlled. He knew these ruins. He had studied them during the assault. There was a collapsed tunnel nearby, just big enough to squeeze through, just hidden enough to go unnoticed. His heart pounded as he heard the men fan out behind him, sweeping the area. Nothing here. You sure? I swear I heard something. Probably just the wind. We should report back. Ethan didn't wait to hear the rest. He slipped into the broken tunnel, the darkness swallowing them whole. Cirella's fingers weakly curled against his arm, gripping onto him as though she knew how close they had come to death. He exhaled slowly, pressing deeper into the tunnel, carrying the enemy he had chosen to save. There was no turning back now. The escape plan, enemies turn allies. Ethan moved through the tunnel in silence, carrying Cirella in his arms. His breath was steady, but his mind was racing. The collapsed passageway was tight, forcing him to crouch as he navigated through. Dust and loose rubble crumbled beneath his boots, and every shift in the darkness felt like the walls were waiting to collapse. He didn't like enclosed spaces, not after what he had seen in the war. Cirella stirred weakly against his chest, her breathing shallow but steady. She was light, too light. Malnourishment had stolen much of her strength, and he could feel the sharpness of her bones beneath her torn armor. If he had found her just a few hours later, she probably wouldn't have survived. That thought sat heavy in his stomach. After a few minutes, he reached an opening. They emerged into a ruined sector of what had once been a Xal Corps outpost. Ethan recognized it from his mission briefings. It had been a command center before the UEC bombing runs tore through it. Now, only jagged walls and scattered wreckage remained, a graveyard of metal and dust. Carefully, he set Cirella down on a slab of broken concrete and knelt beside her. She winced, her body still too weak to move properly. Even so, she watched him carefully, golden eyes studying every move he made. Ethan pulled out his medkit again, retrieving a small injector filled with a nutrient-rich solution, standard issue for emergency field care. He held it up, showing her the small vial before pressing the injector to her neck. "This will help," he muttered. Cirilla tensed at first, but as the fluid entered her system, she let out a slow breath. The color returned to her face almost instantly, her body absorbing the much-needed sustenance. For the first time, she sat up on her own. "You should not have done this," she said, her voice stronger than before, but still hoarse. Ethan huffed. "Yeah. Well, I've been making a lot of bad decisions lately." A flicker of something passed through her gaze. Amusement? Or something else? She didn't answer right away. Instead, she looked around the wreckage, as if taking in just how much destruction had been left behind. Then, she spoke a sentence that changed everything. "I was left behind on purpose." Ethan's brow furrowed. "What?" Cirilla's fingers traced the cracked metal beneath her, her expression unreadable. "My people did not abandon me by accident. They left me here, to die." He stared at her. The Salcor weren't known for mercy, but abandoning their own soldiers. That wasn't their style. They prided themselves on loyalty, discipline. If Cirilla had been left behind, there had to be a reason. "You're saying they did this to you?" Ethan asked slowly. She gave a slow nod. "I was a problem. A voice against the war. A voice they did not wish to hear anymore." Ethan exhaled. "A political exile. That changed everything." "Let me guess," he muttered, rubbing a hand over his face. "If they find out you're alive, they'll make sure you don't stay that way." Cirilla's silence was answer enough. Ethan glanced at the ruins around them, then back toward the direction his unit had gone. He had already lied once for her. If they found out, he'd be court-martialed, or worse, it was treason to help an enemy. But the more he looked at Cirilla, the less she seemed like one. "We can't stay here," he said finally. "If my team comes back, they'll check this place." Cirilla hesitated. "Where will you take me?" That was the real question, wasn't it? Ethan didn't have an answer yet. He needed a plan. Somewhere safe, somewhere neither the Calcor nor the UEC would be looking. Then it hit him. "The old comms tower," he said, mostly to himself. "It's just outside the war zone. Been abandoned for months. We might be able to." A sound cut through the night like a knife. A deep guttural growl. Ethan's hand snapped to his rifle as a shadow moved in the ruins nearby. Cirilla stiffened, golden eyes flickering with something not fear, but recognition. "They found me," she whispered. Ethan's stomach dropped. "Who?" A low, inhuman voice echoed in the darkness. "The bounty squad," Cirilla murmured. "They are here to finish what my people started." Ethan tightened his grip on his weapon. He had been prepared to hide her from his own kind. He had been prepared to lie, to sneak, to escape. But now it seemed, he would have to fight. The betrayal. A deadly setback. The air grew thick with tension, as if the ruins themselves were holding their breath. Ethan's grip on his rifle tightened, his instincts screaming that something was very, very wrong. Cirilla remained still, but he could feel the shift in her energy. She knew what was coming. Then the first shot rang out. A plasma bolt sizzled through the air, striking the rubble just inches from Ethan's position. He cursed, pulling Cirilla down as another shot followed, blasting chunks of stone into the night. "Move," he barked, yanking her behind cover. The ruins erupted in chaos. More figures emerged from the shadows. Calcor hunters. Their armor was darker than standard military gear, sleek and fitted with silencing tech that made them nearly invisible in low light. These weren't ordinary soldiers. These were the ones sent to clean up mistakes. And Cirilla was a mistake they intended to erase. Ethan peeked around the cover and fired off a few rounds, forcing one of them to duck. The bounty squad was smart. They didn't rush in. They moved like ghosts, their footfalls silent, their plasma weapons humming with lethal precision. Cirilla pulled herself up, breathing hard. She wasn't a soldier. That much was clear. Whatever position she had held before the war, it hadn't involved fighting for her life like this. "We can't outrun them," she whispered. They will not stop until I am dead. Ethan gritted his teeth. He already knew that. The Salcor were ruthless, but bounty squads. They were patient, efficient, unforgiving. These weren't mindless grunts. They were professionals, which meant he needed a different approach. "Listen," he said, ducking as another shot whizzed past. "I need you to trust me. Can you do that?" Cirilla hesitated. Trust a human. It was almost laughable. But what choice did she have? She nodded. Ethan pulled a small disc-shaped device from his belt. A smoke charge. Standard issue for human soldiers, but deadly in close quarters if used right. "You cover your eyes," he ordered, clicking the trigger. Cirilla barely had time to react before the device exploded into a cloud of thick, blinding smoke. The ruins vanished in an instant, the darkness swallowed by a choking fog. The bounty squad reacted fast. Too fast. A voice barked orders in the Salcor tongue. "Switch to thermal." Ethan cursed under his breath. Of course they had thermals. A shadow moved through the smoke. They were coming. Ethan turned to Cirilla. "Run. Now." She hesitated, but something in his voice. Asterisk, asterisk, a certainty, a command, a promise of survival. Asterisk, asterisk, forced her into action. She stumbled forward, weaving through the ruins as fast as her weakened body allowed. Ethan, however, stayed behind. He needed to buy her time. The first bounty hunter appeared through the smoke, his visor glowing a dull red. Ethan didn't hesitate. He drove his knife upward, catching the hunter between the plates of his armor. The alien let out a garbled snarl before dropping lifeless to the ground. But Ethan wasn't fast enough to dodge the second attacker. A blunt force slammed into his ribs, knocking the air from his lungs. He staggered, barely managing to raise his rifle before a heavy boot kicked it from his hands. He hit the ground hard, his vision swimming. A voice rumbled above him, low and cold. "Human, you should not have interfered." Ethan rolled just in time as a plasma blade sliced down where his head had been. He reached for his sidearm. Too slow. The bounty hunter kicked it away too. Dan. Before Ethan could react, something heavy struck the back of his skull. His world tilted, then went black. Some time later, a dull pain throbbed in Ethan's head as he slowly regained consciousness. His wrists ached, bound together with heavy restraints. His surroundings were different, no longer in the ruins. He was in a dimly lit chamber, an old storage bay maybe. Metal walls, flickering light, the distant hum of a hovering ship. They had moved him. A shadow loomed over him. The bounty squad leader. Ethan's vision was still blurry, but he could make out the alien's cruel, jagged features, the way his golden eyes gleamed with amusement. "You are either very brave or very foolish," the leader said, voice thick with a guttural accent. "Perhaps both." Ethan worked his jaw, tasting blood. His lip was split. "Great. If you wanted me dead," he muttered, "you would have done it already." The leader's mandibles twitched in what might have been a smile. "True," he admitted, "but you are interesting. A human risking his life for a traitor. That is worth investigating." Ethan glanced around. No sign of Cirilla. Had she escaped? Was she still running? The bounty leader crouched in front of him, tilting his head. "Where did you send her?" Ethan didn't answer. The leader's smile faded. "You are bleeding. That is unfortunate. My employers want answers. They will not care if you are in one piece when I give them." Ethan let out a slow breath. This was bad. Then the door to the chamber slammed open. A figure stood in the doorway. Not a bounty hunter. Not one of the UEC soldiers. Cirilla. She wasn't running anymore. She was here to fight. The turning point. Humanity's fury. The room seemed to freeze. Cirilla stood in the doorway, her violet skin streaked with dirt and sweat, her golden eyes burning with something Ethan had not seen before. Determination. Defiance. A choice. For the first time, she wasn't waiting for someone to save her. The bounty leader turned slowly, his mandibles twitching in mild amusement. He had expected a fight from Ethan. He hadn't expected it from her. "Ah," the leader mused. "You came back." Cyrilla's hands trembled at her sides, but not from fear. From rage. "You left me to die," she hissed, her voice sharper than the blade at the bounty leader's hip. The bounty squad had marked her for death. She had accepted it once, but something had changed in her. She had been shown mercy where she had expected cruelty. She had been saved, not abandoned. And now she would return the favor. Ethan took the moment of distraction to act. He wrenched his hands forward, snapping the binds against the edge of the metal crate behind him. Pain shot through his wrists, but he ignored it. In one fluid motion, he lunged forward, slamming his elbow into the bounty leader's throat. The alien stumbled back, coughing, but recovered fast. Too fast. Ethan barely had time to duck as a plasma blade sliced through the air where his head had been. Cyrilla moved at the same time, grabbing the first weapon she could, a fallen plasma pistol from one of the dead bounty hunters outside. She fired. The bolt missed the leader's head by an inch, but struck another bounty soldier entering the room. The alien crumpled, his body hitting the floor with a sickening thud. The room exploded into chaos. Ethan grabbed a fallen rifle and fired into the fray. A bounty hunter lunged at him, but Ethan was faster, twisting his body to slam the stock of his weapon into the alien's jaw. Bone cracked. The bounty fell, but there were too many of them. More figures flooded into the room, drawn by the sound of battle. The bounty squad had been expecting to clean up a simple job. They hadn't expected a war. Cyrilla ducked behind cover, her breathing ragged. Her hands trembled around the grip of the plasma pistol. She had never killed before. Not like this. Ethan saw the hesitation. "Cyrilla," he shouted over the gunfire. "You need to move." She flinched, snapping out of her daze just as a plasma bolt sizzled past her ear. She had to decide. She could run. She could hide. She could leave Ethan behind like she had once been left behind. Or she could fight. Cyrilla exhaled sharply, steadied her grip, and rose. Her first shot hit a bounty hunter in the shoulder. He howled in pain, dropping his weapon. Her second shot did not miss. For the first time in her life, Cyrilla took a life not in defense of her empire, not in service of duty, but to protect something she had chosen. Ethan saw it, felt it. This wasn't just survival anymore. It was transformation. The bounty squad leader snarled in frustration, realizing his hunters were losing control. "Enough," he roared, lunging forward. His plasma blade cut the air in a lethal arc, forcing Ethan to roll aside at the last second. The blade barely missed his chest. Ethan knew he couldn't keep dodging forever. The leader was stronger, faster. He had to end this now. With a burst of adrenaline, Ethan grabbed a broken pipe from the wreckage and slammed it against the bounty leader's wrist. The plasma blade flickered out as the leader staggered back, momentarily disarmed. Cyrilla took the opening. She fired one final shot. The plasma bolt struck clean through the leader's chest. His body went rigid, his golden eyes wide in disbelief. He let out a low guttural noise, not of pain, but of surprise. Then he fell. Silence. The remaining bounty hunters, seeing their leader dead, hesitated. Some backed away. Others fled. They were killers, but they were also mercenaries. Without leadership, without orders, they had no reason to stay. Cyrilla lowered her weapon, her chest rising and falling with heavy breaths. It was over. Ethan stepped forward, still gripping his side, his body aching from the fight. But he smiled. "You saved my ass," he said. Cyrilla met his gaze, a new fire behind her golden eyes. "You saved mine first." They weren't enemies anymore. Not soldiers from different sides of a war. Just two survivors standing together in the ruins of everything they once knew. But they weren't safe yet. Not by a long shot. Ethan turned, hearing the distant rumble of approaching ships. More were coming. More hunters. More soldiers. They had only won the first battle. The real fight was just beginning. The final choice. A new beginning. Ethan didn't need to look up to know they weren't alone. The distant rumble of ships was unmistakable, reverberating through the shattered walls of the ruined outpost. More bounty hunters, more mercenaries, more danger. Their victory over the squad had been sweet, but it had been a temporary reprieve, nothing more. His heart raced as the sound of the approaching ships grew louder. They were outnumbered. Even with Cirella by his side, even with her new fire, he knew the odds were slim. The bounty hunters would return, and this time they wouldn't hesitate. Cirella stood next to him, her shoulders stiff, her expression unreadable. Her hands still trembled slightly from the violence of the fight. She had never wanted this. She had never asked to be a soldier. But war had a way of making people choose sides, and sometimes those choices weren't black and white. Ethan met her gaze, seeing the silent question in her eyes. What now? His mind raced, but there were no good answers. Escape was impossible. The Salcor would hunt her to the ends of the galaxy. The UEC would see Ethan as a traitor, a deserter. No matter where they went, they wouldn't be safe. I should have left you, he said, his voice hoarse. The words came out more as an apology than anything else. Cirella shook her head, her voice soft. No, Ethan. You did what I didn't have the strength to do myself. There was a quiet understanding between them now. No more enemies, no more borders between them. They were survivors. The sound of engines thundered above them, and Ethan snapped back to reality. They were running out of time. Cirella grabbed his arm, pulling his attention toward her. We don't have to keep running. We can stand and fight. Ethan's mind raced. What would it mean to fight now? They weren't soldiers anymore, not in the way they once were. She wasn't the enemy. But neither were they exactly allies, not in the traditional sense. There were still too many questions, too many forces working against them. Even if we fight, there's no winning here, Ethan muttered. We'll just end up dead. Or worse. Cirella stood tall, her eyes burning with something new, a determination, a defiance. I don't care. I won't run anymore. Not from them. Not from the life I've been forced into. She paused, looking over the battlefield, then back to him. We've been fighting against each other for too long, Ethan. But it doesn't have to stay that way. Ethan stared at her, his mind still struggling to catch up with her resolve. She wasn't just talking about survival anymore. She was talking about changing everything. He saw it now. The possibility, the glimmer of something more than just a desperate escape. We can send a signal, he said suddenly, his eyes narrowing as a plan started to form. There's an old rebel fleet, a group that's been hiding out in this sector. They're opposed to both the Exalcor and the UEC. If we can reach them, they might help us. We might be able to start something bigger than us. Cirella's expression softened, but the fire never left her eyes. You think they'll listen to us? I think they'll listen to anyone who can offer them a way out of this damn war, Ethan replied. He paused, taking a deep breath. This was it. There were no more options. There was no more running. But there was still hope. All right, Cirella said, her voice steady now. Let's go. They moved quickly, pushing through the wreckage toward the communications tower Ethan had spotted earlier. It was their last shot at getting the help they needed. The ship's engines overhead had now faded into the distance, but he knew it wasn't over. The bounty hunters had most likely called in reinforcements, and the next group would be much larger, much deadlier. But they kept moving. As they reached the old tower, Ethan set to work, using the broken terminal inside to access the encrypted comm systems. Time was running out. The sound of engines grew louder again, and he knew they were here. Come on, Ethan muttered to himself, his fingers flying over the keys. He knew the system was old, but it was still a chance. He just needed to get the transmission out. Cirella stood guard near the entrance, her weapon raised, her body tense as she scanned the dark horizon. Ethan could feel the weight of her gaze on him, and he didn't know why, but it steadied his hands. She was with him, and that was enough. Suddenly, the terminal blinked, the signal locked in. Ethan hit the send button, transmitting a coded message to the rebel fleet. "Done," he said, almost out of breath. Cyrilla didn't relax. She knew this wasn't over yet. They would still have to face whatever came next. But at least now, they had a chance. "Now we wait," she said, turning to face the horizon. Ethan nodded, joining her at the entrance. Together, they stared into the dark, knowing that whatever the future held, it would be different from the past. They had crossed the line between enemies and allies, between victims and survivors. The sky above them was still dark, but in the distance, there was a glimmer of light, the first sign of a ship arriving. And with it, the beginning of something new. The war was far from over, but humanity had shown its strength, not in battle, but in compassion. They had fought for each other, against all odds. And that would be the spark that ignited everything to come.